audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you are audible, sir.
Okay. No, I mean, there was something in the chat box. Your voice is not audible, so that's it. Okay. So, yesterday we were discussing about the philosophy part. We mostly discussed the philosophy part, stating again and again the role of philosophy in research. And I had tried to kind of correlate the basic tenets of philosophy as an activity, as a way of thinking, as a conception, as an idea, and how that is correlated with research. So that was how we had tried to approach the problem. Today we will be building on that foundation. How? We'll be building on that foundation by gradually moving on to the core research ethics or ethics in research, and try to look at the different dimensions of ethics in research. Towards the second half of this session today, I shall take you through some journal publications. I will share those publications with you on the screen to make you understand, to have a feel of the importance of ethics in research practices. I would again like to thank my colleague, Dr. Subrata Ghosh, who has been kind enough to share some very important publications which he came across with me. Thank you, Subrata, for sharing those publications with me, and we can discuss the issues raised in these papers, and I hope that we can formulate later on through more interactions, more deliberations, more brainstorming, something authentic, something original out of these interactions. So let me start by sharing the screen today. So I hope the screen is visible to the dear participants. So we are once again looking. We are once again looking at the basic meaning of the word ethics. Now, this is a generic description which is not only confined to research, but to human behavior in general. So what is ethics then? We can, yesterday I was also discussing a set of principles, moral principles, that will govern a person's behavior, activity, thinking process, presuppositions, interactions with fellow human beings and non-human beings also, because how you behave with non-human beings is also a very important component in the ethical activity that we presuppose. And tied to ethics are those questions of moral principles, questions of standards of behavior, questions of moral correctness, questions of ethos, questions of principles, and so on. But our focus today will be mostly on how we can correlate ethical behavior or expected ethical behavior with research activity. I know that there are different, researchers belonging to different faculties here. Yesterday we were discussing that. Researchers in the engineering sciences and technology, researchers in management sciences, researchers in the natural sciences, biological sciences. So we'll try to provide you a common denominator in the ethical practices, which could be important. So let's move on then. Now, we are kind of returning to what we have already discussed yesterday, but probably not in much detail, that UGC has formulated, set up this UGC CARE, where CARE stands for Consortium for Academic Research and Ethics. So yesterday I was also discussing this, that UGC and other regulatory bodies, learning, a great learning experience for each one of us, that how lack of research integrity, lack of publication ethics can have a very detrimental effect on the academic ecosystem in general. This can include professors, faculty members, researchers, academic administrators, universities at large, institutions, and of course, all the regulatory bodies who are involved in the process, like UGC or AICT or PCI or BCI and so on. And why is it important? Because as I told you at the yesterday's deliberation, discussion, interaction, and rather not call it a class, is because integrity, philosophy of integrity, philosophy of ethics is such a overlapping, ubiquitous kind of topic. It is not restricted to any particular activity. It is not restricted to any particular domain, any particular subject, any particular discipline, or any particular individual, or even any particular timeline during your research process. You may be a young researcher starting your career. You may be a mid-level researcher. You may be a faculty member who is doing active research, or you may have almost superannuated, ending your professional career, but still active with research, because all of you know that research is an activity which never stops. Probably know that a few years back, one professor won the Nobel Prize in chemistry, was almost in his 90s, and he was working still in the lab when he received the news that he has been awarded the Nobel Prize in chemistry. So obviously there cannot be any stoppage in your research activity as long as you are active, as long as you are passionate about your work. So the main object then of UGC CARE is to promote or improve academic research integrity and the publications which will result from such research in the universities, institutions, and other academic organizations in the country, and overall to help the Indian academicians to choose their avenues of dissemination of knowledge through journal, interaction with the peer community by attending conferences, by attending workshops, webinars, seminars, etc. So UGC wanted to lay down certain guidelines which will benefit the Indian academic community. You will be able to judiciously choose what kind of journals they should publish in, what kind of conferences, seminars, workshops they should attend, because a lot of ethical guidelines and principles are attached here. Now, based on these two, that means promoting research integrity, promoting publication ethics, pointing out the possible avenues for spread of knowledge, for making interactions, for enriching themselves, will obviously lead to a general elevation in the quality of research and publications which will come out from Indian universities, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of quality. So yesterday we had seen already that what are some of these activities regarding predatory journals and predatory conferences, and how the university, UGC overall, and university ecosystem in general is trying to prevent this. I mean, only last week or a couple of days back, I saw UGC has again published a list of fake universities which have been operating in different states of the country. So it's an ongoing process, as I was telling you in yesterday's class. Does not stop after a particular activity. It has to be ongoing, and it has to be kind of in a review mode. That means you come out with a set of guidelines, you publish a set of regulations, you publish some rules, and then you need to upgrade them, change them, modify them according to the need of the hour. So here is a summary of the sort of nutshell research ethics. One very important thing, of course, is data management. I will keep coming back to it. Then, of course, protection of human subjects, very, very important when you are moving to clinical trials or medical activity, medical sciences. Honesty and integrity of research, lack of not showing cruelty to animals, respecting IPR, intellectual property rights of your fellow researchers, individuals, even students. Very, very important. This is not only important for students, but I think probably the onus is much more on senior people, faculty members, professors. They will have to show the right path to the young researchers, to the young faculty members, to their associates, so that overall there is an improvement in the ecosystem. I will take questions from the chat box in a moment. Then there should be trying to avoid scientific misconduct. What are the examples of such scientific misconduct? We will see, we already know, like plagiarism, like selective reporting, like data misrepresentation, like fabrication of data, like falsification of data, and so on and so forth. We will show you with by displaying some important publications how this come about. So let me return to this question that we need to avoid scientific I mean, when we talk about scientific misconduct, we do not necessarily mean it's scientific research in the science domain only. We mean research across the board, which can include research in social sciences, which can include research in management sciences, which can include research in physical sciences, engineering sciences, biosciences, and so on. So openness and objectivity in research, trying to avoid scientific misconduct. See, one very important thing is researchers should be made aware of what we mean by the term scientific misconduct. What is the connotation of the term scientific misconduct? I mean, that is why a course like this is so important, because we are trying to give you an idea of what can be labeled as scientific misconduct, so that we can all try to avoid indulging in such misconduct. What happens sometimes is we really do not know that we have indulged in a misconduct. Like all of us make photocopies from published books. But then according to the rules of the game, this is not really proper, because you can photocopy entire books, and therefore you are depriving the author or authors of this book from getting their due royalty. So this is wrong, this is misconduct, this is unethical, almost illegal, but we do sometimes indulge in. Maybe there are constraints, but we should try to avoid. So that is why the importance of this course, enlightening young researchers and also enlightening all of us about what constitutes scientific misconduct. Avoiding plagiarism, it's a very big issue, plagiarism. And that's why every university today needs to take the PhD thesis through stringent plagiarism checks before it can be submitted. And remember, this not only applies to research of other people, but even to your own research. If you publish a paper today and you do a complete cut paste from that paper in your own publication, say a year later, that will also be constituted as a misconduct. Because why misconduct? Why misconduct? Because you have not put in sufficient intellectual capital into the second publication. You have lifted out from your first publication, which has already the intellectual input that you have put in your first publication has already been awarded because it has been published. The peer review community has awarded you by according publication. So you are using the same thing twice. You are not putting enough efforts in your second publication. So that is not ethical in the framework of ethical research. And of course, maintaining confidentiality. For example, if you gather data, say income data from people, or like say when the cephalologists conduct an exit poll, all names should be anonymous, or even opinion polls, everything should be anonymous, so that there is no harm to the people who are participating in such exercises. Then data management, of course, and responsible publishing. So we'll keep coming back to all of these in the next few moments. So let me take a look at the chat here. Yes, IPR stands for intellectual property rights. Yes, absolutely right. Shishobhan Roy asked this question and Reshmi Modik has answered. Thank you, Reshmi, for sharing the information. Let's move on now. Now, this is more of an academic interest, which shows a timeline in research ethics starting from the early 30s and continuing as far as 2016 or 2017. So, I mean, if you look at this long timeline, which we will share with you down the line, you can see one thing, that there has been a lot of continuous activity here. And that is what I was trying to point out a moment back, that just undertaking some courses or UGC, publishing some guidelines, maybe regulatory guidelines, will not take us to proper ethical practices in research. One of the reasons why it is difficult to do so is because the term ethics, the concept, these are also changing. Look at this timeline. It starts from 1932 and ends in 2017. Today we are 2020. So this is almost a 100-year timeline, 90-year timeline. It is but natural that what was construed as ethical or unethical almost 90 years back may have changed down the line. So it is important that we keep on updating ourselves, keep on discussing, and keep on figuring out that what would be the ethical practices, what would be the research ethics as on date. But remember that the very important concept of philosophy, which I was discussing in yesterday's class, that we need to periodically step back and see at where we are heading. And that is where the concept of philosophy becomes important. It's not just doing things by hand. Well, you need to dirty your hands if you want to do meaningful research. That's true. But the philosophical angle comes in there, that you also need to survey, presuppose, ideate, conceive that in what way you will take your research activity, in what way you will take forward your publication, in what way you will take forward your interaction with your fellow researcher, in what way, what will be your vision. Remember that I was discussing Hilary Putnam yesterday, and there were two very important words that came out of it. What were the two words? One was vision, second was argument. And Putnam very categorically says that unless there is a vision, then no arguments will be able to take you to that vision, because you do not know what you are trying to achieve. And it is also true that mere vision will not enable you to achieve something, because there are two aspects here. One is at the logical level, where you have a vision of what to do, and the other at the more physical level, where you need to have a set of activities, arguments, concepts, ideas clear to reach that goal, reach that milestone. So Hilary Putnam's ideas are extremely relevant even today, that if you want to have a proper philosophy of thought, proper checking on what you are doing, you must have both vision and argument embedded in your system. So you can see that there have been studies from 1932, and there are many of these studies have been from the health domain, because in those days medical ethics It's still very, very important, but in those days it was probably even more important. And you can see some very unfortunate things here, like in 1939 to 45, German scientists conducting research on the prisoners were holed up in the concentration camp. Then the Nuremberg Code for research on human subjects was introduced. Those of you who are into medical research, all of you know that every institution should mandatorily have a bioethics committee in place, and there should be regular meetings of that bioethics committee to consider, evaluate, and approve necessary things. Then the discovery of the structure of DNA after, and this is very, very instructive, 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the structure of DNA after secretly obtaining diffraction data from Rosalind Franklin without her permission. These are, well, discovery of DNA was a milestone, but there is an element of doubt in it when we consider the how data, and that's why going forward, this was 1953 up to today is 2023, just 80 years on, we are looking so carefully at data management. We are looking so carefully how to organize data. We are looking so carefully at sources of data. If those of you have already published, you know that when you submit any manuscript to a journal, they will ask for that the sources of data. They will, and you need to, either you have to provide the data or you need to tell them that if the manuscript is accepted, then you will be at any point of time ready to provide the data, because obviously they will check the data to see how far the data are relevant, how far it is correct, from where from it was derived, and so on. 1964 marked a very important thing because the World Medical Association developed the Helsinki Declaration, which clearly stated ethical principles for in medical research, which involve human trials, human subjects. And by the 1960s and 70s, animal protection laws were adopted, were strictly put in place following large amount of animal rights movement. Then this Henry Beecher study, which is kind of whistleblowing study on how unethical practices were being done. 1989, NIH mandates responsible conduct of research education being imparted to graduate students receiving training grants. This is very, very important. This is very important because when you are doing funded research, that is when your research is funded by some agency in India, that this could be UGC, this could be CSIR, this could be DST, this could be DBT, this could be ICMR, this could be Ministry of Education, whatever it is. But when grants are provided to you, then it is doubly important, because grants are provided to you means what? From where do these grants come? Government provide these grants. So this is people's money. This is public money. So you are being provided with public money to conduct research, and therefore it is very, very important that you should strictly adhere to ethical principles of research while carrying out your own activity, your own work, your own research by utilizing such public money. So this 1989, this was a very, very important year when NIH laid out this mandate, pushed forward this very strongly that responsible conduct of research is mandated for graduate students who have been endowed with appropriate research grants by funding agencies. It was done in the USA and it was also being done here. In 2001, this European Union directive, journals such as Nature and JAMA, they were asking authors to define their responsibilities when publishing research. That means, and today it is very common, 20 years down the line, that was 2001, 2023, whenever you wish to submit a manuscript, you will see this, you will see conflict of interest, you will see declaration of competing interests, you will see, you will have to give your sources of fund or grant, you will have to acknowledge if I am sitting at the university and writing a manuscript, then I am of course using the overhead provided by the university, the electricity bill, the computers, even the water that we are The space, very important, the space that is the university is providing, not only this lab space, that is true, but even if you're doing a theoretical study, your computational space, your lab space, your own sitting arrangement, everything the university is providing. So even if there is no formal grant from any funding agency or from your university, it is very important that in a manuscript, you acknowledge the support that you have received from your university. So this is very, very important. And by 2013, the conflict of interest guidelines came in. Again, look at this funded research. Why I am putting a lot of stress on this is because funded research is being carried out by utilization of public money, and therefore it is mandatory. We have an ethical responsibility, not only in the research domain, but also towards the general public, taxpayers who are funding our research. You see, our names will appear in the research publication. We will get promotions, we will get accolades for this research. But whenever it is a funded research, and even if you forget funded research, even if university is providing you the basic facilities, all universities are also run on public money. State public universities are run on public money. So it is very important that we properly utilize the public money. Now here again, you go back and look at the philosophical aspect, the ethical aspect, forget the research part, but the philosophical and the ethical aspect which we were discussing yesterday, again, very much comes into the picture here. It very much comes into the picture. The moral principles, the code of conduct, which we were referring to yesterday, again becomes very, very relevant here. So, anyway, so these are some of the examples, and you need not remember any of this, but my objective is to cite these examples and to push through the discussion is to make you aware of why, when you submit a manuscript to a journal, good journal, why these things come in? Why do they harp on what kind of funding you have got, what kind of trials you have done, whether you have an ethical committee, whether there has been a conflict of interest. I will come to another very important thing later. Every good journal today says that list the contributions of the authors. This authorship part, very important. I will show you. Okay, so let's very slowly move forward. So these are some international ethics code that you can see, following from the list of ethical activities that you saw just now. These are some international ethics codes, like Code of Ethics from the International Sociological Association, Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights from UNESCO, International Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research involving human subjects. Why, you might ask me, why so much of stress on biomedical research, biological samples, etc.? Because remember, these involve living organisms. And obviously, society has a huge responsibility towards living organisms. That's why they keep on harping on. And also, you can see one thing that this has come from different organizations, like International Sociological Association, you can see on the screen, Council for International Organization of Medical Sciences, World Medical Association, Nuremberg Code we saw just now. Then American Chemical Society, ACS, very important, very, very famous organization. Singapore Statement on Research Integrity. Why? Because many of the countries have been continuously laboring on this, exploring on this, on how to improve their quality of research. Now, improvement in quality of research does not only mean publishing in high impact factor journals, it also means publishing, doing your research in an ethical manner, following certain philosophical rules and principles which have been honored through the ages, and making sure that the publications which result from such research activity are morally and ethically correct and right. So that's why, because so many organizations, so many countries have been actively involved. So that's why you see there are different names coming here. So again, a very short summary, share this with you again. So Shamu and Resnick have effectively summarized the important ethical requirements for researchers, like integrity. We'll keep on discussing this, honesty. And I just read out a few lines from honesty. Communicate and report your research data results, methods, procedures, and publication status honestly, very important. Strictly avoid falsification, fabrication, and misrepresentation of research output. Now, see, it's very obvious. It's something like this. See, when you are doing research, what is it that you want to do? You want, as I told you yesterday, you want to add something non-trivial to the existing body of knowledge. So that is something which will survive through the ages. It is not that you publish a paper today. It may, you see, today people speak of age index. Why? Because people want to figure out how much is your citation index, how many times other people have looked at your work. That is important because you are adding something to the existing body of knowledge, to the body of research. So it is very important that people should look at what you have done, and then they should try to advance their own work accordingly. That is how human civilization has progressed over the years. Therefore, if you represent something wrongly, if you hide data, if you say a null hypothesis is correct when it is actually not, then you are doing a great disservice not only to research, not only to knowledge, but to society, because you are doing something absolutely wrong. And even many lives may be lost. In a medical trial, if you misrepresent, if you do something wrong, then scores of lives may be lost, which will have a severe detrimental effect. And then what happens is people generally will start losing their faith on researchers. So that is why honesty is very, very important. Like, do whatever, report to the extent, but then let other people judge. That is why it is very important that you go to good peer-reviewed journals. Let other people judge. They figure out that what you have done, whether it is reproducible, whether when you do, somebody else does the same set of experiments on the same data, whether they are getting the same result. That is reproducibility for you. Someone else only doing same set of experiments, the same set of data should be able to get same set of results. That is, if I say that 5 plus 3 is 8, my colleague Dr. Ghosh will also say 5 plus 3 is equal to 8, and all of you also say 5 plus 3 equal to 8. That is reproducibility for you. Then, of course, objectivity. There should be no bias in the experiment or study design or data analysis, data interpretation, data objectivity, the peer review process, grant writing. You must be absolutely transparent. You must be absolutely objective. For example, it may not always be possible you have done some calculations in a manuscript, or you have reported some study. It's very novel. Then it may not always be possible for the peer review team to figure out whether what you have published is absolutely correct or not, whether it is not falsified. It is very not easy. We review several, we often act as reviewers, and it is very hard, particularly when it's a very complex technical paper. It is very hard because, as I was telling you repeatedly yesterday, only the researcher himself knows his work perfectly well, not even the supervisor. Therefore, it is not easy for others to judge. So that is why it is your responsibility, ethical, moral, social responsibility, to be objective and to be honest in your research reports. Then also, you should be not only competent, but also should be careful. That means, now this careful and data objectivity are very important. That is, you should be able to record your results properly. Suppose a medical researcher or a life science researcher is recording some results in his lab notebook. And based on those records, he or she has published a paper. maybe 5 years down the line, there is a challenge to that particular publication. Someone else says, no, I believe was not properly done. So that is why it is very important that you retrieve your lab records. Those might be digitized today, that is separate, but those should be made available so that if there is any conflict, there is any dispute, then you should be able, as a researcher, as an inventor, to properly defend it. Okay. Then finally, some other topics, like you should be absolutely avoid discrimination against any colleague or any student or any fellow being in terms of certain parameters like gender or race or religion or ethnicity. You should have complete respect for IPR or intellectual property. And also, for the supervisors must continuously strive to inculcate the spirit of ethical and responsible research in their mentors, in their students, in their PhD fellow co-supervisors. This is an activity which will be very, very contagious. If I find that my colleagues are very ethical, open, transparent, objective, careful, competent in their research activity, then I should also try to fall in line so that we can together move forward. Finally, these two, as you can see on your screen, animal care, show respect and care for animals in a study by avoiding bad study designs and experiments. And for human subject protection, we should be able to maintain respect, confidentiality, and welfare for the human subjects. Now, I come to a very, very important part of this research, which is managing research data. Just now, I was telling you that you have undertaken some research based on primary data that you have gathered, maybe from your lab experiments, maybe from some survey data or so on. And then when you have actually made some publication, someone comes in and tell you that no, it is disputed, it is flawed, needs to be re-examined. So that's why this data management is very, very important. Data ownership is important, which implies you need to own the legal data, the research data. Once you complete a project, it is very important that you retain the data, you have the ownership of the data. So who are the important stakeholders in this data ownership process? Of course, number one, the funding agency. Number two, the organization where you are working, the PIs, and all the data sources. For example, if I have got data from certain source, then data, of course, belongs to them. Data belongs to the principal investigator. Data belongs to the funding agency, and data, of course, belongs to the organization where you are pursuing your research activity. So you should be very careful about your data collection. I mean, you should be almost very, very finicky about data collection. Must stick to very, very time-tested, strong. There should be no deviation. Something like this, that if I turn to a very different subject, which is, of course, correlated. Statistics, all of you know, there's something called hypothesis testing. I have been mentioning this null and hypothesis since yesterday. And there are two types of error. What are the two types of error? One is type 1 error. What is type 1 error? Rejecting a null hypothesis when it is true. And type 2 error, accepting a null hypothesis when it is false. Now, why I am giving this example, I want to tie this up with this data collection, data maintenance process. Just give me a moment. So, type 1 error, rejecting a null hypothesis when it is true, and type 2, accepting a null hypothesis when it is false. Suppose a company is manufacturing pacemakers for the heart patients. Now, there is a particular plastic unit in that pacemaker, let's say. And the null hypothesis is that plastic unit is going to last, let's say, 2 years. Lifetime is 2 years. Age 0, it's greater than equal to 2. Minimum lifetime is 2 years. And H1, alternative hypothesis is it's less than 2 years. So now, once you have gathered data and trying to check the null hypothesis, remember I was telling you yesterday, what do? We argue like this. There is enough statistical evidence to accept the null hypothesis or to reject the null hypothesis. Now, if it's using those plastic units to manufacture a pacemaker, then it is better for you to indulge in type 1 error. What would happen if you indulge in type 1 error? That means you are rejecting a null hypothesis when it is true. That means the actual lifetime of the plastic unit was greater than equal to 2 years, but you are throwing it out. Why you are throwing it out? Because if by chance the plastic unit malfunctions, the pacemaker will malfunction, and that might lead to death of the patient. So you should be very finicky, focus on type 1 error, indulge in type 1 error. But then if you are using that same plastic unit to manufacture a non-critical item, maybe a piece of bucket, even if that bucket breaks down in less than 2 years' time, it is not going, the sky is not going to fall. So in that case, do not indulge in type 1 error. And I would request you to follow this maxim when you are engaging in the data collection, data management, and data storage process. Remember, there are two very important things in today's world. One is acquisition of data, storage of data, analysis of data, and from data you move to information. From raw data you move to information. From information you move to knowledge. From knowledge you move to insight and actionable. So the data acquisition, data storage, data management, data analysis is very important, and then you need to disseminate the knowledge which you gather after careful analysis and management of the data. So that's why management of data is today is becoming more and more important. Data sharing, data knowledge, data, and today you see we are talking about big data. We are talking about data which are of huge volume, data which come in so many varieties, data which come in at huge speed. You are bombarded with data, bombarded with social media data, bombarded with internet data, bombarded with mobile data, and so on. And data comes in all kinds of forms, as text, as images, as audio, everything. Even as we speak, we are continuously generating data. And of course, you need to check the veracity of the data. Remember the 4 or 5 V's of big data, namely volume, then velocity, then variety, then veracity, then value. 5 V's of big data. So that's why, as you can see from these slides, the importance of data is becoming more and more important. Research data should be able to maintain the integrity of the research data. Any group which is handling data should maintain proper privacy, proper confidentiality of the data. There should be no leakage. It should be very, very important. You should maintain continuous checklists on how you are collecting data, how you are identifying the data collection, and you should be able to fix up accountability here. This is particularly true for the professors who are supervising big research projects. They have enormous responsibility, ethical responsibility, to fix up accountability in this data process. Because see, today, everything is data-driven. We speak of triple DM, data-driven decision making. We speak of data which is in turn guiding even the theoretical processes. We are continuously checking whether the theories that you are developing, so it's a kind of a co-development, co-evolution of the theory and data. So that's why no amount of stress on data management, to my mind, is enough in this case. Okay. Move on then. Now we come to another very important topic, and that's authorship. I was just trying to mention about authorship. Today, if you go to a submission in any journal, you will find a few things. First of all, you will find that you need to list the contribution of each author. That is, if there are 4 authors in a manuscript, then you must say that who conceived the idea, who collected the data, who curated the data, who analyzed the data, who wrote the first draft of the manuscript, who reviewed the manuscript, whether any validations were run, whether it was tested that anything not proper has crept into the data management process. So this individual contribution of every author, the journal asks. And you can see here that according to the guidelines for authorship introduced by the International Committee, journal editors, there are these 4 criteria. They should be met minimum to be credited as an author, substantial contribution to the study conception and design. Look at this data acquisition, analysis, and interpretation. Very important. It starts from acquisition, storage, analysis, interpretation, because only after you do the analysis and interpretation, you will be in a position to generate the appropriate knowledge, which will actually comprise the conclusions and inference of your research study. That's why such importance is attached. Drafting or revising the article for intellectual content. See, I was mentioning just now that if you lift the same lines, the same content from your own publication and paste it to another publication, your own ones, even then it could be constituted as plagiarism because you have not put in the intellectual content here. So now look at this, drafting or revising the article for intellectual content. Approval of the final version. If the communicating author, if I as the communicating author submits a manuscript to any journal, and there are 3 other co-authors, then the journal will immediately send emails to those co-authors to check whether they agree with the submission. And they give a timeline that if you don't agree, do inform us. If you don't inform us within such and such period, we will assume that you have agreed to the submission. So this approval of the final version is extremely important. And all 4 or 5 or 2 or 3 co-authors should be on the same page regarding the nature and content of the finally approved version. And if you can see, if you submit, let's say Elsevier or Wiley or whatever it is, you will see that after you submit your text, submit your table, submit your figures, they will generate the PDF. And then you are required to review the PDF, and they will repeatedly ask you whether you are ready to accept it as your final version. And they will continuously send you mails. Your PDF is being built. Your PDF is being built. Then your PDF is waiting for approval, so that you need to actually approve and then submit. So this approval of the final version is very important. Many of you have, I'm sure, actually submitted in such journals. So you will have a first-hand feeling of why they are writing this. If you open any such submitted manuscript, not the final manuscript, submitted manuscript, you can see that all of these are actually listed. Then agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of the work. That is what I was telling you, that it is very, very important that you be accountable for the work that you are doing. Otherwise, it doesn't make much sense as the author or as the lead author or whatever author, co-author, to be in the thick of things. I am responsible for the research that I am publishing. And if anything goes wrong, any dispute arises, any flaw arises, then it is mandatory on my part to answer this. Again, I am putting so much stress on the authorship because ultimately this is a work on publication, and publications in the final analysis will involve authorship. So one should be very, very careful, ethical, and responsible about authorship. The order of authorship should be a joint decision of the co-authors, very important. That is, when you are, suppose there are 3 co-authors, whether I should be the first author, or Dr. Ghosh should be the first author, or Dr. Das should be the first author, and what should be the order. That is a joint decision of the co-authors. Individuals who are involved in a study but don't satisfy the journal's criteria for authorship listed as contributors or acknowledged individuals. Examples include assisting the providing research space, departmental oversight, like you have engaged someone to collect data, but he or she is not providing an intellectual input to your endeavor, just merely collecting data from some websites. So in that case, he or she cannot be listed as the author of the publication. Of course, you must acknowledge the contribution made by that individual. So as a contributor or as an acknowledged individual, her or his name must be present. If you don't do that, that is unethical, scientific misconduct. But you cannot include that name as an author's name. Now, there are three types of authorships which are considered unacceptable, and I'm showing you in the next slide what these are. Like ghost authors who do contribute, but they are never acknowledged. Often they are just paid money. And guest authors who make no discernible, that means no noticeable contribution, but their names are provided so that the chance of acceptance of the manuscript increases. For example, if I am doing something on fintech, and there is an acclaimed expert in fintech from somewhere, and I know that he is on the, of course, you might argue right away that, but then these are blind, peer-reviewed, anonymous. Yes, true, but there could be several gaps here. Typically, it should be the case that the names of the authors should not appear when you are sending them out to referees, reviewers, but there could be issues there. That's why these names are sometimes put to add weight to the manuscript. You see, somebody very big has been part of my research team, has been part of my author team. He has been my collaborator, my co-author, and so on. So it's called typically guest authors and gift authors, whose contribution is based solely on some loose affiliation with the study. Often happens, sorry for saying this, that you have done some experiments in a laboratory outside your own institution or organization. Then someone from that laboratory might say that we helped you in the process, not an intellectual input, true, but some help in providing the facility, user facility. So put our name. Unless you put our name, we will not provide user facility. So that's sometimes called a gift authors, and all of these types of authors are generally considered unacceptable from a purely ethical perspective. And we are really going back to what I was showing you, that misrepresenting a scientist's relationship to their work, like putting in names of people who are not being directly actively engaged in this research, and deleting names of people who have actually been in the thick of things. So that is something which is very, very wrong and constitute gross misconduct. And therefore, those who have made significant contributions to the study, their names should be avoided, should be mentioned clearly in the manuscript to avoid disputes and set forth expectations from the outset about what the role of that particular individual is. Like this ghost authorship, people who have helped you in drafting the manuscript, they have never been in the as a part of the study. I mean, they may not be even related to your domain. Suppose you are doing some work on an engineering discipline, say on civil engineering, and you have hired somebody who is a professional content writer, or who knows how to write very well, to help draft your manuscript. I mean, it's very simple. See, again, those of you who are into publication right now, or who are associated with this, you know that many journals today provide professional assistance in your language skills, because English is not our mother tongue, it's not our native language. So they would tell you that there are professional language editing services available, of course, at a price, a very high price, to help you in your final drafting of the manuscript. Now, that does not mean that you will put in the name of that individual as an author, because that individual, she or he, may not even be remotely related to your domain of work. So therefore, these are typical examples of what you call post authorship. And similarly, as I mentioned, the gift or guest authorship, people who are only very remotely connected to the study, either their names will carry enough weight, the authors believe that inclusion of such a name will have enough weight to push the manuscript across the reviewers, or somebody, because of some far-flung contribution, wants his or her name to be attached to this. Now comes a very important thing. Again, though, for all of us who have been regular contributors or submitters to journals, we know this, that we need to declare our competing interests, declaration of competing interests. That means whether there is an undisclosed some kind of a relationship that may pose a competing interest. For example, people who are editors of a particular journal will never be allowed to be co-authors there, because that would be a conflict of interest. Similarly, there could be an undisclosed funding source that they provide such conflict of interest. So that's why you see, if you look at the second point, when submitting a paper, a declaration with the heading role of the funding source should be made and placed before the reference is mandatory. If you don't do it, they will never accept your submission. They will keep on raising the red flag and tell you, this is not done, this is not done, do this, do this, do this, like that. And this last line, very important. Editors may request that authors of a study funded by an agency with a proprietary or financial interest in the outcome of a statement, such as, I had full access to all of the data in this study, and I take complete responsibility for the integrity of the data and the accuracy of the data analysis. Because you see, there are certain conclusions, there are certain inferences which could be potentially damaging if not properly contained. That's why we are normally very, very careful when we try to look at this conflict of interest, or when we try to understand what it means by declaration of competing interests. These are actually important. Sometimes we overlook, sometimes we think, okay, we have to do this when we want to submit to a journal, let us do this. And similarly, when you are submitting the list, every journal asks for a list of reviewers. They would also say that whether there is some competing interest. I mean, for example, say somebody you know very well, somebody who has been your collaborator, ideally you should avoid giving her or his name as a reviewer. Because if somehow your name becomes public, then the element of bias is almost sure to creep in. So you see, now that we have covered a long distance, what are we seeing? We are seeing that we are actually moving away from our core domain. Our core domain could be finance, or our core domain could be computer science, or our core domain could be social science, economics, pharmacy. But we are more now looking at these aspects, and you can see for yourself that these are not empty things. When you are actually submitting to a journal, you have to satisfy all of this. We need to give a list of the reviewers. We need to declare whether there is any competing interest, whether there is any conflict of interest. We need to declare the source of funding, and we need to clearly delineate the role of the different authors, contribution of different authors in the production of the manuscript. So each one of these we need to do. But once we are made aware of the formally, we are made aware formally about the ethics, publication ethics, research ethics, about the integrity part, intellectual integrity part, then obviously we would gain more handle in, we would gain more traction in doing this successful in future. That is why this course assumes importance. And that is why UGC had endeavored to come out with these UGC care recommendations, and they are continuously updating and upgrading them. And now comes plagiarism. Those of us who have been in research, you know, it's a very, very serious issue. And today, what happens is, if you apply for a promotion in your respective organization, maybe you are an assistant professor and you wish to be promoted to associate professor, then your publications will also undergo, even your published papers. Remember, your published papers may be subjected to a plagiarism check, because maybe it was published at an earlier time when such plagiarism check was not so stringent. So again, your book chapters you have written, papers you have published, books you have published, they will be genuinely subjected to a strict plagiarism checking. So what it is, you know, it could be either a literal copying, reproducing a word verbatim without written permission or without acknowledging the source. It could be significant or substantial copying, that is borrowing tables or data or using equipments without proper acknowledgement. Substantial could be, as you can see on the screen, it could be defined as both quantity and quality of what you copied. For example, somebody has done a job or work and you're almost reproducing it, which is definitely significant copy. Very bad thing. Then paraphrasing. I mean, you are not really copying, but you are borrowing all ideas of another person and merely summarizing them with a change of language. You have changed the language, but you have essentially retained all ideas. Now you can do that, particularly when you are doing literature review in any manuscript, or even in your thesis when you do literature review. We often do paraphrasing, but for that we need to be properly acknowledge what the author is saying. Number one, acknowledge the contribution, role, name of the author, and second, you should not unintentionally or intentionally change the meaning or significance or connotation of what the author was trying to say. Because if you do so, it will be a serious breach of trust. You are quoting the author, you are saying Mr. XYZ. Now, she has probably tried to mean some X or mean A, and by mistake, maybe unintentional, you are, through your paraphrasing, making it look like B. But that will be very wrong because you have done a wrong literature review. So that's why the paraphrasing will be very careful, and you see the advice here on the last right-hand column. Make sure that you understand what the original author means. Never copy and paste words that you do not fully understand. True. Think about how the essential ideas of the source relate to your own work, and compare your paraphrasing with the source to make sure you retain the intended meaning, even if you make a change of words. While this literal copying is, of course, something truly disastrous, substantial copying also, but paraphrasing is more tricky. Sometimes you have probably no bad intention. You are doing literature review, you have to paraphrase, but wrongly, because you do not know properly how to do such paraphrasing, you end up doing wrong things. So that is what we must avoid. And then the text recycling, which I have been mentioning since some time, that is, you are reproducing parts of your own work, You have not copied from anybody. You have not stolen someone's ideas. You have not stolen someone's language, but yet you have just lifted your own work and put it in another manuscript. And why this is wrong is because it immediately implies that you are trying to publish a paper without a significant amount of putting in significant amount of intellectual capital into it. That is the objection posed by ethical research. And finally, this last line, very important. When in doubt, always consult with a professor or advisor or someone in a position of authority can guide you to the right course of action. So what this means, in other words, is there is an enormous amount of responsibility of the professors, of the research supervisors, or people who are managing things at a senior authoritative level vis-a-vis the research output of the PhD students. Then we take a quick look. We have actually covered most of these, but duplicate publication prevention, that is, one is simultaneous submission. That is, you submit the same manuscript to 3 different journals. And then when you find that one particular journal is lapping it up, considering it seriously, you just withdraw from the other 2 journals. Very wrong, because you have actually wasted the efforts of the other 2 journals. And also, when you submit, you will see the journal will inquire in the submission process. When you're doing this online step-by-step submission, the journal will inquire whether you have submitted it in some form to some journal, some book chapter, or some conference, etc. You should try, because you should have enough confidence in your intellectual ability to submit to a journal and see where it leads to. Then duplicate publication, when an author submits a paper or part of your paper which is already published to another journal and not quote the earlier publication. That is also related to the text recycling. Text recycling, the same thing you are doing. That is also very much wrong. Then paraphrasing or text recycling, we just saw. And then translation of a paper published in another language. Someone has submitted to a journal, maybe in some other language. You make no acknowledgement of the original paper, but you do a translation and submit it to some English language journal. Yes, translated articles are acceptable when you have obtained necessary consent from the previous publisher or the author. You must check with the publisher whether such submission is at all acceptable. Otherwise, this is a very, very serious offense, and it could be land you in extremely serious offense. Then we come to research fraud. That really takes us back to the data part once again, that manipulating of data, modifying data intentionally, changing, omitting data. I was mentioning yesterday that suppose you have put out a formulated research hypothesis, and through your extensive data analysis, you find that your null hypothesis is not being properly supported. There is enough statistical evidence to reject the null hypothesis. And then you hide some data. You do not submit the entire data. You only display, show, submit that data which somehow leads to acceptance of your null hypothesis. Because you have presupposed the results. Again, let me try to link it up with the philosophical part, the presupposition. The stepping back part, you should have stepped back and figure out that what to do, how to plan. You see, philosophy is an activity, and that activity involves a lot of planning activity also. Therefore, in no way, when you are doing empirical research, before you have actually gathered data, before you have actually analyzed data, before you have actually interpreted the analyzed data, you are in no position to say what would be your inference, what would be your conclusion. On the other hand, if you already know the results even before performing the experiments, it is disastrous for research in general, research in particular, and academics in general. So what are the remedies? As I said at the beginning, you should keep a very, very stringent record of the data. Record of both the raw data and the processed data. And whenever the publisher requests for you should be in a position to submit the required raw data in a very transparent, objective, clean, open form. There cannot be any hiding, because you see, at the end of the day, all your efforts are directed towards dissemination of new knowledge and therefore upgradation of human knowledge as it stands today. You are, as I was telling you at the beginning of yesterday's discussion, that this is, let's say, a circle where our knowledge in a domain is contained, and you are trying to slowly push out the boundaries of that circle. You are trying to generate non-trivial results. Therefore, you should be very, very careful in management of data. Try to conscious, because if you indulge in any research fraud, it's only going to harm you as a member of the society in the both long and short term. So why should you do this? It's absolutely unacceptable. Second, manipulating data images. Manuscript may be rejected if the original data are not presented or misrepresented. So review any data image used to support your paper to make sure nothing has been altered. Once you make a submission, you should be able to defend it at all costs. Repeat, once you make a submission, whether it's a theoretical paper, whether it's a computational paper, whether it's a lab-based study, that could be dry lab, that could be wet lab, that could be computation, you should be in a position to defend it. And there is no hassle in defending it, because you have followed ethics, you have followed laws, you have followed rules, you have adhered to a good code of conduct in doing it. So no harm in doing it. Going back to the pacemaker example, if somehow somebody misrepresents the data, and then it turns out that the null hypothesis that the plastic unit shelf life is greater than equal to 2 years is supported, you accept the null hypothesis, and then the pacemaker blows up, and a person may lose her or his life. So it's very, very important that you follow ethical practice. This is interesting, the next slide, about what you call salami slicing. Now, what does this mean? It means that you have collected data for an experiment. You have done the experiment, you have done the data analysis, you have got the results, and now in a position to write a manuscript and submit it to a journal. But then you want to generate multiple publications from that single study. So instead of, now remember, this entire study is an integrated one. So unless you report the entire study, not much meaning will accrue from such study. For example, if going back to yesterday's example, I am trying to find out what was the impact of the pandemic-induced lockdown on the general economy of the country. Then I should be reporting on all macroeconomic indicators of the country. I should be trying to find out how the macroeconomic indicators got affected, how the capital markets got affected, how the labor market got affected. So there should be an integrated study. On the other hand, if I give shoots of study, this is for macroeconomics, this is for the capital, this is for the labor market. And that is a typical example of salami slicing. Because in that case, we're actually distorting your research out. Everything goes back to the same thing, that you should try to present convincing, wholesome, and integrated research, which will add to the body of knowledge in a meaningful way, which will help people, help individuals, help society. On the other hand, if your only objective is to increase your research publication, number of research publications, then it is not going to add any value to either you or to the research community at large. So this is an example of what you call salami slicing. Salami slicing can result in a distortion of the literature by leading unsuspecting readers to believe that data presented in each slice is derived from a different subject sample. Well, it is not. There was only one data source, but you have made it look like there are different data sources which have led to these different results. So you should try to avoid wrongly breaking up the study into 2 or more manuscripts. So the salami slicing today is a very big issue. And I must say that regulatory agencies are also to blame. Because sometimes when you are looking for a promotion, they will give you numbers, marks based on the number of papers you have published. If you have published 1 paper in a very good journal, you may not get as many marks as you have published 4 in not so good journals. So I think it is imperative that along with introduction and pushing for the research ethics, proper measures should be put in place to ensure that people who are doing ethical research, people who are respecting intellectual honesty, who are respecting scientific integrity, there should be a ways and means of rewarding them in both the long and the short term. So these are some of the typical examples of why you should publish your research. This is taken from Elsevier sites. You can yourself go to the site and check out. There are lots of resources, materials in that slide, like ethics.elsevier.com, and it tells you that how ethical publishing ensures scientific progress, it's good for your reputation, promotes good culture. And as I said, the basic idea is that once you publish ethically, you add something non-trivial, something meaningful, something insightful to the body of knowledge. And that is going to benefit you, okay, as an author, as an inventor, as a publisher. Also, it is going to benefit your research community, and it is going to benefit society, it is going to benefit academics at large. So it is very important that we stick to these rules. So now we are really coming to the end of this particular presentation. We'll go through some of other publications, so some of the references. Now this last one, now you can see this, I have already mentioned, displayed the references there. The 4th one here, one on the YouTube by a very famous professor of HBNI, Homi Bhabha National Institute, Professor Siraguru. You can take can look at, just go to this link, and you can see several lectures. I have borrowed from his lectures also, but that's why it's important to give reference. Coming down from the Elsevier side, and then there is this book. This is slightly unrelated, the last one. It's a book by Matthew Crispin and others on philosophy for everyone. A cheap Indian edition version is available. So those of you who are interested in taking a more philosophical view of the entire matter can take a look at this book. Very, very useful book, Philosophy for Everyone. Matthew Crispin, David Ward, Duncan Pritchard. They are typically from the UK school, some of them from Edinburgh and others. So I would maybe can take a look at these books, this particular book. Also the lecture by professor on the YouTube, Elsevier one, all these are very important. I'll now stop this particular share, show something else to you in a moment. Okay. So what have we been doing so far? Is that we have been trying to get a handle on what ethical research means and what are the broad parameters of ethical research, what typically constitutes a scientific misconduct, and how or in what way we can overcome indulging in such misconduct. So all of these are very, very important. And I am trying to quote examples to ensure that you have some idea of where this course comes in and what is the importance of this course. Let us not believe that this is a course you are taking only for the sake of it. No, this has got real hard intellectual necessity. And that intellectual necessity is borne out by the examples that I was citing. Like when you are actually submitting to a journal, you need to fulfill these requirements. Else what can happen could be pretty troublesome for both you as a researcher, for your supervisor, for the organization you belong to, and of course to academics at large. I would now take a little bit of time in looking at another publication in Nature. So let me share the screen here. I hope you can see the screen here. So this is a
Yes, sir, it is visible, sir.
okay. Thank you, Prem. So this is a journal publication from Nature, and it's titled "Repairing Research Integrity." It's a very interesting title, "Repairing Research Integrity." So we are accepting the fact that there has been a serious blow to research integrity in general. So we need to revisit and do our best, because you see, people value researchers to a great extent. Therefore, it's our bounden duty to ensure that we are able to reciprocate the respect which is bestowed on researchers. And therefore, this improvement in the research integrity is of a very, very high order. It's very, very important. Okay. Now, I will just take you through some important information here. First of all, this is very important. You can look at the small box here. Institutions must establish safeguards for whistleblowers. Very important. That if somebody is actually at the forefront of exposing the wrong practices being undertaken, then it is the duty of the organization to protect that lady or gentleman so that she or he does not fall prey to the machinations of people who are indulging in such unfair practices. So this is a long drawn battle. It's never easy to do these things. It's always a fight. And it is important that organizations pitching, organizations do their bit to promote, very strongly promote, safeguard, and encourage such individuals. Also check what they are saying, because it is not always true that everything is fine in this part also. There should be constant vigil to be exercised. So I am not going back to the question of what constitutes a misconduct or all that thing. You can see some on the right corner. I will share this with you later. A postdoc changed the numbers in assays in order to improve. That is very something that we have been discussing. That just to make the data look better and to make it fit better with the hypothesis, you juggle the numbers. A co-investigator on a large interdisciplinary grant application reported that a postdoc fellow in his lab falsified data submitted as a preliminary data in the grant. Because when you are applying for a large grant, the granting agency checks whether you have enough track record, visible, credible track record in that area. And therefore, either you need to have published paper or you need to submit some initial research data which you have gathered through your efforts to the granting agency, because then the granting agency will be sure that this lady or gentleman has enough background in this particular area, so that if the granting agency awards funded research project, it will be successfully completed. So in that sense, if you fetch the data and get the grant, you may not be able to actually successfully complete the project, which is again very wrong. Now, see this, I was talking about this images, research images and all that. A colleague used Photoshop to eliminate background bands on a Western blot to make the data look more specific than they were. You were not getting good images out of your experiments, and then you do some Photoshopping, you play with the images to make sure that the data look good. Again, these are very, very wrong conducts, and this must be recognized, this must be identified, and appropriate action initiated so that these practices are not repeated in future. You see, one of the objectives, if you again go back to the philosophical part again and step back from a lot of discussion have been going on here. As an organization, what should you do? See, my own take on this is, it is no use penalizing an individual or penalizing a group. They may have indulged in some misconduct, because at the end of the day, there are two things. Why could they indulge in misconduct? Why could they indulge in misconduct? Because your system allowed it. So you must ensure appropriate checks and balances in your system. Second, through this misconduct, this particular researcher has not only tarnished his or her own image, but image of your institution, of your university, organization, and of the general research community. When these things come out in the newspapers, they are paid so much, they see it ideal. They don't do anything. They go to research labs, here, look at us. We are toiling hard, doing so much. And these people sit in AC rooms, doing some research which has no effect on us. What the hell they are doing? So that's a very negative impact. Therefore, apart from making sure that your system does not allow these manipulations to occur, we must work on raising the level of awareness to ensure that generally people associated in your group, people in your organization, people in your research establishment, they will be completely, all of them take a pledge that we will not indulge in research practices, nor will we allow such scientific misconduct, such research misconduct. So therefore, it's a difficult battle, and UGC has taken the right step in inculcating some of these things in the research students, research scholars, but then we must all pull together our resources to achieve this. Another thing, extrapolating the survey results projects an alarming picture of underreporting. That is, you see something like this. Like, if you know that typically, how do you do inferential statistics? There are two kinds of statistics broadly. One is descriptive. I was kind of discussing it yesterday. 4 pillars of descriptive statistics: measures of central tendency, measures of dispersion, measures of shape, measures of association, and bivariate data are considered. Now, typically in a inferential statistics, you have a sample, you have a population, and you know everything about the sample. For example, you know the sample mean, you know the sample standard deviation, you know the sample variance, sample skewness, sample kurtosis. If it's a bivariate data, sample correlation coefficient. And based on those things, everything known about the sample, you are making projections or predictions or estimations about the corresponding quantities of the population, like population mean, population variance, population standard deviation, so on. So it should be typically. So that's kind of inferential statistics. So you should be very careful in doing this, because remember, why are you working on a sample? Because you don't have means to a population, or it could be impossible. Like you cannot take out entire blood of a human being to do his blood testing. You do take a sample. We cannot dig up the entire soil while constructing a house. We do a sample. You cannot take all the water out of a river when you are doing testing for some water sample. So that is typically why something has to be done. But then you should be very careful in doing your inferential statistics when you are trying to move from the sample to the population. You know that inferential statistics is basically a link between the sample parameter, sample statistic, and the population parameter. So I think that you should be very, very careful. That is what it is saying. Now, look at these figures. Now, these are very important figures. Suspected misconduct, 201 cases observed by 164 scientists. Now, what is the type of misconduct? Fabrication or falsification of data. That comes to around 60%, 59.7, roughly 60%. Fabrication or falsification of data. Plagiarism, purely plagiarism, around 36%. Some other unknown things, 4%. That's low. So almost 60% fabrication or falsification. That's alarming. That's very bad. And plagiarism, another 36%. So together they add to 96%. That's a huge figure. 96%. Now look at rank of those suspected. Professor or senior scientist, 21.9%, close to 22%. Full professors or senior scientists. Associate professor or scientist, one rank below, that's 13.9 or close to 14%. Assistant professor, 16.9, that's 17%. Very interesting. As you are actually associate professor, little less, but professors is almost 22. And remember, professors are at the highest echelons of university academic hierarchy. Postdoc fellow, 24.9, that's 25%. Graduate students, 14%, and others, another close to 12%. We might ask the question, why are professors indulging in such misconduct? They are already gone up to the highest echelons. To answer this question, I will not answer this question in this forum. But to answer this question, maybe we need to turn back to the philosophical aspects, which we have been discussing yesterday. We have to turn back to Putnam's ideas of fission and argument. Yes, Shagota wants to ask something. Can you kindly write in the chat box? Just let me finish this in a moment. Then I request all my dear participants to put the right in the chat box so that I am in a position to answer. Okay. Now, finally, how it was discovered. That's a long shot. Directly observed around 11%. Observed products 26%. Told first, then observed became close to 30%. Direct evidence 15%. Others 15%. And there are then others. Was it reported? Reported by responder, that's 24%. Reported by somebody else, 33%. Never reported, 37%. That's fairly high. And no answer and don't know, that 5%. So that's typically DKCS, don't know, can't say. So several interesting facts emerge out of these real hard data. Remember, these are actual hard data that we are looking at. And we need to be very careful in dealing with these things. Remember, these are sensitive matters. If 25% professors have been involved in this, you just can't go out. They are not ordinary people. They have reached the highest echelons of academic standards. Becoming a university professor is a very big thing. So one needs to tread carefully when tackling these issues. But remember that we need to report this, we need to two things, I think. One is the system should be designed in such a manner that it should automatically respond and try to cut out these aberrations. And secondly, there should be enough awareness created among the stakeholders of the system to ensure that there is such aberrations are minimized. System means you are putting in some externalities. You are putting in some regulations. And this awareness, this means that people out of their own free will try to prevent this from happening. Nothing regulatory always. You know, in academics, we cannot always run academics in a regulatory mode. It's not pure law and order. Even you cannot run law and order also like. So I think we should be a little careful in handling these things. With this, I will stop here and step back and see if there are questions in the chat box. You're most welcome to write in the chat box. I'll wait now before I go to the last part of the discussion today. But I will wait and see for the people to respond in the chat box. And I would again take this opportunity to request my colleagues, Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Das, to kindly ensure that there is some kind of a thread, some kind of a forum, some kind of a group created out of focus group created out of this activity, so that we can continue to exchange ideas and opinions in the days to come. And as there will be more such exercises, we gradually expand that group in order to build up sustained credible academic ecosystem in our university. Okay, I'll try to share a little bit of few more things if I can. Okay, rather than sharing, these are some things. Okay, I would also request now participants to raise hands. You may directly take questions and move on with the discussion. Okay, Shushabon Roy has asked one very important question. What is the percentage of plagiarism that needs to be minimized in journal writing when you are submitting a thesis? I think Subrata should be less than 10%, right? I think yes. No, there is no such restriction about the maximum number of authors for publishing a paper. No. For example, if you are looking at very big experimental projects, then there could be many authors in that project. But obviously, the criteria for authorship that have been laid down, those should be satisfied. But there is no hard and fast rule. What are the points need to focus for publishing in scientific journal? Okay, what kind of papers are accepted? Okay, let me tell you that prints in SCI journals. Okay, this depends on two things. First of all, the scope of the journal. When we want to submit in a typical any journal, you should look carefully at what is the scope of that journal. You may have you have done a very good study and you have authored a good manuscript, but it might just happen, it could be outside the scope of that study. Now, I will tell you one thing from my own experience. That suppose you are trying to submit to journal X, you look at the scope, you have actually your paper, your manuscript contents do satisfy that scope, but then you have not been able to present that in a proper manner. Because today, every journal receives hundreds of submissions. Therefore, it is a big challenge for the journal and to classify the papers and to figure out which ones to keep, which ones to go for desk rejection. Desk rejection means it will never enter the review process. The associate editor, assistant editor, he or she has checked and found that this is unsuitable for our journal. No, this is not a commentary on the quality of the paper. So so that's why it's important that you should write your manuscript in a very proper way. I will just take 1 minute off and I'll return to you in a moment. হ্যাঁ বলুন হ্যাঁ বলুন হ্যাঁ 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 আচ্ছা হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ না আমার মনে হয় ওটা আমাদের একটা কম্পিউটার সায়েন্সের রিসার্চ কমিটি আছে, তার আন্ডারে ওটা ছিল, কিন্তু এখন যদি আলাদা করে ভিএলএসআই করতে হয় সেটা Okay, sorry, there was a very important call I had to attend. I have seeing some other questions. How to avoid salami slicing for publication? Okay, Shagota. As I said that in order to adhere to the ethical practices, the best thing would be for us to report the entirety, a particular study in its entirety. That way, we can avoid this salami slicing. Can you provide the SCI journal list accepted by Macau? The UGC care list is, of course, given in the UGC website, and my joint coordinators, Dr. Jadov Das, Dr. Subrata Ghosh, and others, they will help you. This is from Reshmi Maulik. Reshmi, University PhD cell is always there to give this support. Okay, then something from Rupam, how many papers are required to publish to submit thesis? Okay, it's typically 2 conference publications or attending a couple of conferences and 1 paper in UGC Care Journal. But I would strongly request you to try to publish at least 2 papers in good journals of good impact factors. That is my suggestion to you. Then let me see. Regarding the journals and all that, as you can say at our how to reduce desk rejection, that I told you, need to be very careful about reviewing the scope and nature of the journal, and you should present your manuscript in such a way that the handling editor is convinced that your manuscript conforms to the nature and scope of the journal. And this is something you can only achieve through more and more exposure to research activity. No, for PhD scholar, it's necessary that he or she is postdoctoral. No, not typically, not typically. In fact, to start with, it might so it actually depends. See, policy that I showed you that how the authors are listed, how the authors are listed, that will be a joint decision of the co-authors. It's a completely a joint decision. It is always good to be a first author, always good to be a corresponding author, but it depends absolutely on the all the co-authors. We have no role here. Okay, Shamona Mollik, she has asked a question that it later got discontinued. Okay, when you are publishing, it should be in the UGC, it should have been in the UGC care list. But you see, if you are doing it in journals from reputed publishers with good impact factors, then it will not be an issue. That's why I am always emphasizing that you should try to publish in reputed journals from good publishers like, say, Elsevier or Wiley or Sage or Taylor and Francis, like that. These are examples, not inclusive list. These are examples. IEEE transactions, of course, very, very huge, and so on. SEM and so on. Can you use a conference procedure without ISSN number? May not be. Try to avoid. Try to avoid. Try to give references which are valid. I mean, we should. Well, these are some of the rules of PhD. Will not actually answer because these are not really related to research integrity or publication ethics. These are much more related to the operational part of the thesis. So maybe the PhD itself will be able to answer this better. So if you have more questions, you can always keep in touch with us. It's not that once this course gets over, we'll probably once again try to organize a meet of the research scholars so we can discuss these things in more detail, take questions, interactive sessions or workshops. My colleagues, Dr. Ghosh, Dr. Das, and others will surely be at the forefront of organizing such things. So I think this will be a very good exercise, and I must say I'm very happy with the kind of responses that I have got. In fact, when I started this talk, I was a little skeptical. It's all about philosophy, ethics, and things which looked a little vague. But now that we are almost finishing these sessions, I must say that I've been very impressed with the kind of proactivity that you have shown. Thank you so much. Okay, Maloy, what is the minimum time to submit the thesis again? These are operational parts of the thesis submission. I would request later on the PhD cell to respond to these queries. So, Dr. Ghosh, I think we are almost coming to an end. I have spent a lot of time, and the research scholars must be very irritated by now, hearing about ethics and philosophy and all that stuff. So
yes, sir.
We would gradually call it a day. But do keep in touch and keep in touch with our research PhD cell. Contact us. Remember that you saw that line that please consult your senior supervisor professors. We are always there for you. And there is a famous line, I hold it very dear to my heart, that in university or any higher education institution, faculty is God, but student is a greater God. So we must all try to serve you, the students and PhD scholars. Thank you for joining. So, Subroto, I think we will gradually wind up. And
yes, sir.
All the best. All the best. Keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you, participants. So tomorrow we will have our session from 12. And tomorrow, Professor Parthopratim Mitro, he will be taking the session. And thank you. Thank you for your beautiful and insightful deliberation. Thank you so much.
Okay. I'll take your leave. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.